Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar with Paul Timm on school safety and security concerns as we begin to emerge from COVID-19. We appreciate you spending a bit of your day with us. I'm Laura Hanna. I'm one of the marketing managers for Vector Solutions. Vector Solutions is the developers of the Safe Schools suite of K-12 safety and compliance solutions. Before I introduce our presenter today, I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping notes. All of our attendees are in listen-only mode today, which means you're muted. During the webinar, if you have a question, please type it in the questions pane. We'll answer questions at the end. We do have a time for Q&A, so go ahead and during the presentation, feel free to jot those down, and then we'll get to those at the end. During the webinar, if you experience any issues with the audio and you're logged in and listening through the computer, one suggestion is to try dialing in to the phone using the number that was provided in the reminder email. But if you still have issues, the webinar is being recorded today, and the link to the recording and the copy of the webinar presentation will be sent out to attendees later this week. And with that, again, I want to thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to our main presenter, Paul Timm.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm really glad to be here today, and I want to thank everybody who has joined for also being part of this. My name is Paul Timm. I'm the Vice President of Facility Engineering Associates. I wrote a book that was published in 2014, and I like to kid around and say it's all about school security, so I decided to call it School Security. If anyone is familiar with it, I want to thank you for obtaining it, and also let you know that edition 2 will be released probably in 2 months. So it'll be a fully updated version of School Security. I have some kind of advisory or board membership with PASS, which is the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, also with Campus Safety Conferences, which I would guess most of you know as part of Campus Safety Magazine, ASIS International, which is probably the largest association in the physical security industry, and then IASBO is the Illinois Association of School Business Officials, where I am on the risk management committee. Our firm doesn't sell any products. We do security assessments, a lot of training and keynote addresses and expert witness, and I want to invite you to connect with me. paul.timm@feapc.com is my email address. That would probably be the best place to begin. And then if you're a social media person on Facebook, you can like our page at Safe Schools and the number 1. You can follow us on Twitter at School Security. And then if you want to connect on LinkedIn, it's simply Paul Timm PSP. I also want to acknowledge that for some of you, it's been difficult to join us today because of what has gone on with the weather across the country. And I am based in Chicago. Looking out the window right now, there's at least 2 feet of snow wherever I look, and wherever it's been shoveled or moved, there's 3, 4 plus feet of snow everywhere. So welcome to exciting. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of protection measures in schools. And you're familiar with guidance that has been issued by the CDC, and that has just, as of last Friday, been updated again. There's not so much to talk about in terms of updates. They really stayed in for the most part in line with what they had issued last September. But I will tell you, it's interesting to note that the CDC is not saying it would require teachers to have vaccines in order for things to be safe. They think as long as you're following social distancing and mask wearing, etc., it's already safe to open schools. Now, that's not the only guidance that we have. Many of you are listening to guidance that come from your local departments of health or a state department of health. And I just want to encourage you, let's make sure that we are balancing and investigating as much as possible. That is sort of a dovetail into collaborative planning, whether you're experienced with schools that have gone hybrid or are still fully remote or have everybody back. Collaborative planning is always the key, and this is a takeaway regardless of what happens with COVID over the next few months. the collaborative planning has really been a safety net. And so I want to encourage you, let's bring in the voices that need to be heard in whatever the topic is, but especially in school security. And as I move through, I'm going to name some of those voices that traditionally were not part of the conversation. But collaborative planning is our friend. And if you like equations, I really think the magic formula is collaboration plus consensus is going to lead us to where we want to be. Again, collaboration plus consensus. We may not get unanimity, but with consensus, we've got a safety net. Clear messaging has certainly been a friend in the early days of COVID when athletic fields and playgrounds were closed. Some had put up signs that said, by order of the governor, the field cannot be used. But that clear messaging, whether it was on a sign that was outside the building or regular communications with parents and community stakeholders, it's really important that we continue with clear messaging. We all know what it's like to feel as though we've been kept in the dark or we're not privy as to why decisions are being made. And so clear messaging saves the day. Case in point would be why one school district is open and the neighboring school district is not. And people begin to say, how can that possibly be? And I don't know the answers, but if that district that's closed, if their Department of Health had some kind of guidance for them, that's all information that I would issue through clear messaging so people aren't left to wondering and then resorting to conspiracy theory. We want to avoid that as much as possible. Invested personnel simply means this: if we're communicating to stakeholders, we'd certainly better off be communicating with our own teachers and staff members. And once we do that and people have an idea of why it is we're doing what we are, they become more likely to be invested in the decision that's been made and become somebody who then is an advocate for us. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go forward, but I do want to say this. If you have in any way optimized your security systems, I hope you haven't missed the opportunity to educate your teachers and staff as to where you have cameras, why you have that number of cameras, why we're using electronic access in the way we are, how it takes several moments for a door to close and latch behind us before the building is again secure. All of those things will help personnel be more invested in our safety and security program. A lot of those things are tied to security systems. And again, in the past, people have traditionally been sort of ignorant about why we even have any of those things or how we have them or when we're getting more. That's a big mistake. Let's educate our people as much as possible. And that all spills into the bottom line of awareness. And awareness basically it's much more than see something, say something, which I'll talk about coming up. But we have people with masks, and we're going to have programs opening up again, and many states are now going to be playing those after-school sports or having practices that way. The much safer people are going to be those who are looking around and recognizing things as much more than just scenery and able to report things ahead of time. You bet awareness is going to be critical as we move toward going full-time in places that we haven't been. For people's eyeballs to be working for our safety program is going to make all of the difference. I do want to focus on access control and visitor management because that's one of the areas that was affected first. And with visitor management, we have been kind of a little bit lazy about that in the past, where we've let people sign their own names on a registry that was there for everybody to see. In fact, in some schools, I would walk in and there would be 3 registries: a sign-in, sign-out for visitors, a sign-in, sign-out for students, and a sign-in, sign-out for staff. And I never leave the opportunity there of saying, let's not let somebody walk in and maybe even covertly with their phone take a photo of all of this personal information that we have in registries. Registries should be kept tight to the vest. I am an employee, I'm holding the registry, and I'm getting your information through your ID or whatever it might be. You, as a visitor, should not have access to see what I'm writing on the registry. And I would never trust a visitor to write correct information. And I will admit right now, I generally sign in as Michael Jordan or Chris Bryant or occasionally Beyonce. So it's because no one ever looks at it. Now, a lot of schools have gone in the electronic way to visitor management software. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Wayfinding began to change as soon as we said, my students have to retrieve their belongings, even though they're not allowed here. Teachers have to retrieve their belongings. And we set up ways to do this. Even in your grocery store, for a while, there were arrows and aisles were one way. And listen, we're going to benefit from better wayfinding and all of these things as time moves on. Wayfinding is always a help. I should be able to drive into a parking lot I've never been before in a school and see a pedestrian area. I see clear signs as to where I'm supposed to park for an after-school activity or as a visitor. All of these things will benefit us. Wayfinding and signage is a real help. Getting back to visitor management software, you'll see in the photo here, what we used to have is scanners where your driver's license would go through kind of horizontally. You had to hand that to the administrative assistant. They had to scan it, then they had to hand it back. But no contact has made us move to things like you see here, where the device is more like a toaster, and it draws. I can, as a visitor, put my ID in myself. It draws it down and reads it, and then pops it back up. There doesn't have to be any interaction with an administrative assistant from a touching standpoint. And we've seen this, whether we were voting before or some states were just having voting yesterday. I grabbed a pen from the sanitized bucket, and when I was finished, I put it in the used bucket so that it could be sanitized. We can be doing that even with visitor lanyards, visitor badges that hang on lanyards. When somebody returns that, we can sanitize it and put it in a place that's labeled as having been sanitized, and then when they return it in a place that's different. Those are going to benefit us as we move forward, not just because we've cleared COVID, but people who had germ issues before were concerned about it before, and it's just a good way to do it. Screening, being able to ask questions right from my computer instead of a hard copy or me trying to remember. With visitor management software, I can put those screening questions right there. And yes, they've been COVID screening questions, and we're still running into them, whether it's at the school or the restaurant or wherever it might be. But that's going to be a real help for whatever the next issue is that we face in safety and security, that we can come up with screening questions right there. And from a contact tracing standpoint, even if a pandemic, let's just say 6 months from now or a year from now is becoming a distant memory, we're going to have reason to want to do contact tracing. And visitor management software and electronic solutions like that are going to be a real help for us in contact tracing, to know who was at that game, who was using our auditorium or gymnasium, who came in as a visitor when the local church was renting the gym. Contact tracing, we're all going to benefit from that, even if it doesn't feel like it. That will be a one in the plus column for safety. The last thing I want to talk about in this section is classroom door barricades. And I know people feel strongly about these kinds of things because in general, most schools have classroom doors that swing out into the hallway and locking mechanisms that lock from the outside. So I would have to step out into the hallway and around the door to use my key to lock the door before coming back in. But I want to tell you this, it is my strong opinion that classroom door barricades is not the solution. And I want to tell you why. First of all, from an ADA standpoint, you can't find any that would be compliant, especially when we consider tight pinching and grasping. And ADA is sort of a national way of superseding anything that might have been passed in your state for a specific contraption or device, because I know many states, I shouldn't say many, some states have done that. Even some states have been willing to bend NFPA, National Fire Protection Association codes that say one motion to egress the room, meaning I just push down on the handle, or doors that are fire rated must be self-closing and self-latching. I could go through a number of codes, but the classroom door barricades would fail in all of these categories, even if a fire marshal order to give special dispensation, ADA would still supersede that in terms of importance. And I'm going to go one step further. Most of these devices have never been through any kind of authentic testing capabilities. So you're buying pieces of metal or whatever it might be from people who had good ideas, and to their credit, but I would be really careful about that, because the last thing I wanted to say is all of these devices can be used by the bad guy against good guys. And that's why people have now invented keys to reach underneath doors and get rid of these things so the good guy can get in. I'm telling you, in a panic situation, a real situation, we're not going to want the bad guy to ever have anything up on requirements that the good guy be able to get in. So I want to strongly caution against the use of classroom door barricade devices. From an emergency planning standpoint, it is interesting because many schools had sort of, in theory, a continuity of operations plan, but then had to implement it. And good for us in that we were able to really put some meat on bones. But I want to tell you, now is the time for the people who are coming behind you in 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years to make sure that you've really documented well your continuity of operations. Again, I know that we were forced to go to a place that we did not imagine going, but the lessons learned, and we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel next time. All of that becomes super important in your continuity of operations plan. A pandemic would have been a component that many did not have, and if they did, it was like a flu pandemic. You know, if 4 or 5 teachers get the flu, we might have to cancel school for a day or two, or if a number of people in the community got the flu, we would have to maybe open up our gym and suspend those kinds of PE activities that we normally would have had. But then the pandemic hits and all schools get closed worldwide. It changes the way that component of our plan, first of all, was considered in the front end, but now is implemented in the back end. And again, I'm asking you for everything that you've learned: retrieval of belongings, for flex schedules, for hybrid, for all of these things in the electronics and the things we learned in the early days of Zoom bombing to what we're doing now. I want to encourage you to make sure that these lessons learned are documented, not, oh, we made it through that, or we really blew that to begin with, but we don't have to worry about it anymore. Nope, I would put all those lessons learned into your pandemic section. And then finally, civil disturbances. We're not finding them a lot right now in the middle of winter, but make no mistake, we're not finished with civil disturbances. And many of us were able to duck them or go, oh my gosh, they're happening maybe around the corner or maybe in the urban environment. But make no mistake, civil disturbances are something we need to be ready for. And I want to talk about that a little bit more as we move forward today, but it must be part of, in a robust way, with rigor and discipline, your emergency plan. I would be remiss if I did not talk about the incident command system, which of course is part of the National Incident Management System. And I'm talking mostly about ICS 100. You can simply put ICS 100 into a search engine. You'll find the course to be taken for no cost online. It could take you 90 minutes or even 120 minutes to do it. But I will tell you, for our own company, we have just a small group of us that work on physical security. The larger group of us at FEA are engineers, and many of those engineers would never have thought so much about the incident command system. But when COVID kind of stopped operations for us back in May of last year, in that time frame, April, May, we had everybody in our company get certified in the basic 100 level course of NIMS, which is the incident command system. And I'm strongly recommending that you do the same with your administrators. I believe we'll get to a day where all school administrators will be required to have at least that basic course, maybe even the 200 level, the 700 level. But that 100 level course is right there for you, and it teaches you how to manage any kind of incident. In fact, a good friend of mine says that he managed his daughter's wedding using the incident command system. And so it's not just for dire crises alone, it's for any incident at all. And some of us are going, wow, with the incident command system, once after school things are going on, we've been used to having just one administrator on duty. How could we even fill out those that are supposed to take the incident command system, these 8 positions, and have a backup and a backup? And so I offer to you what's called the Staff Skills Survey. And you can also simply look for that in a search engine, but the Staff Skills Survey is a 1-page form that you would disseminate to all of your teachers and staff. Even if coaches coming in to help with things are not your teachers, they're coming sort of as independent contractors, for lack of a better term. I would have every one of them fill it out, and it takes just moments to fill out, because you either check boxes that you're certified in things like CPR, first aid, and AED, you speak more than just English as a language, you keep emergency supplies in your vehicle. You can fill it out in moments, and that information brought to us, first of all, is going to make everybody safer, because we'll have taken inventory of the skills and supplies that we have on hand. But second of all, I now say, okay, that person is former law enforcement, or they had a career, they had years in the military, they understand standard operating procedures. I can put them in as a backup, or I can put them in even as a primary on some of the incident command positions. If what I'm saying to you is unclear, once you look up the Incident Command System ICS 100 and the Staff Skills Survey, it will become into a lot clearer picture for you. And I'm, again, strongly suggesting that you head in that direction. If I were a superintendent, I would have every one of my teachers and staff fill out that form, and then I would have maybe someone like a health person or a nurse or somebody put that all together, and then get that information out so we all know what capabilities we have. It just makes it so much better from an emergency preparedness standpoint. Let me continue with emergency planning. You see the evacuation map, and with COVID, we've had to alter drills a little bit. Why? Well, because we can't, in a lockdown drill, pack all of the kids onto the floor shoulder to shoulder, or we're maybe not going to have everybody for a fire drill leave at the same time and be walking shoulder to shoulder in the egress pads and then standing shoulder to shoulder in the rally points outside. So what the benefit for us all is that discussion about drills and how they've been altered, whether you're on the side that says we're not altering our drills at all, or you're on the side that says, yep, we're gonna do them a little bit differently, we're gonna do them in phases or whatever. I want you to, first of all, promise me that you're going to get clearance from your emergency responders to make sure that any alterations are things they approve and are fully aware of. But what the nice thing is I'm going to say is we've had to look at our evacuation maps and ask questions like, gosh, do we have a primary evacuation route? Is a solid red line? Do we have a secondary and maybe even tertiary evacuation route, and that would be in a dotted red line? Have we labeled where we would shelter in place? Listen, I know we're in February and it feels like winter will never end, but I just have to tell you this, the most active tornado month is May, which means by the time we get to March and April, we're heading into the spring change of conditions that ushers in more than just what we're going to need from a COVID standpoint, but now where are we sheltering in place? And if we're not going to do a lockdown drill, we still ought to be reminding kids to do that. So maybe we're going to have them stand up next to their desk and answer questions in the room. It's for you to decide, but I do want to offer a suggestion, and that is something that I heard from a school district that I work with. They had never done really a lockdown drill during arrival time, dismissal time, or lunchtime. All of you know how difficult that would be. And so they implemented what they call the stop and think drill. And in the stop and think drill, they do make an announcement. Let's just say it's arrival time. Some people are outside, some people are in hallways, maybe some are in the cafeteria. And they say, your attention, please. We are now going to conduct a stop and think drill. This is only a drill. If there were to be an incident of violence occurring, what would, and you were where you are right now, what would you do? And it gives people an opportunity to really process those kinds of things and think about those things in the place that they're not with default, or it's complicated, or the operations of it all is different than what it is usually for me during the day. I want to strongly suggest that you do a stop and think drill, and again, plan it before you implement it, and make sure everybody's on board, but I would head in that direction. Drills and exercises are what I've been talking about, but I never want to leave out the great value of doing tabletop exercises. And for anybody that's been to a campus safety conference and seen tabletop exercises, I just want to tell you there could be great value in putting these together, and they don't have to be super difficult. I was just speaking with somebody from the Safe Schools Department in Idaho, and they've recently published about 15 tabletop exercises that are just public domain. I know many other states have done that as well, and when I get to the end, there's going to be some other repositories for you in terms of these kinds of resources, but please don't imagine that it's going to be too difficult to do, and then get intimidated and not do it. Really, let's conduct tabletop exercises at a minimum, and I want you to think about drills and exercises as sort of rungs on a ladder. We start with the basic, and we would never then go to a full-scale exercise tomorrow. We're working our way up rung by rung. With tools and supplies, I want to make a couple of suggestions. First of all, this is the time to let people know, especially when we've got masks and hand sanitizer, all of these things. First of all, we want to be careful about what we're doing with hand sanitizer. We would never put a kiosk unit that dispenses over a carpeted area. We would never put a kiosk unit for something that's alcohol-based near an outlet. We would never put a kiosk in a place that is an egress route. We want to be careful to follow state codes on how we store hand sanitizer and these kinds of materials. But the tools and supplies I want to talk about is, since everybody's thinking more about these things, now is the time to remind people about the location of defibrillators and the use of defibrillators. And while of course I would love it if the person who's responding is somebody who's certified, I also know that the typical defibrillator is going to walk you through and talk you through how to operate. I would never, ever want somebody to pass away in front of a defibrillator because somebody was too scared to try. So, but let's think about even where defibrillators are kept, because now people are also keeping trauma kits, which you see pictured here. And I want to challenge you, let's be careful about trauma kits. I'm visiting schools all the time during assessments, and they'll say, did you see our trauma kits? And I'll say, what? Well, no, I didn't. And they say, well, that's because we're keeping them inside the defibrillator cabinet. And while that's kind of clever, and it's good to have them all maybe in an area like that, you must then label in some place. And that's why I've got the photo here. In this case, my Stop the Bleed kit or my trauma kit is in a clear container that lets everybody know that it's there. It would be terrible to need a trauma kit and think that we don't have any, and later on find out that someone had stuffed them into an AED cabinet and we weren't able to even know that they were there. I envision a day where we're on certain places in the building, we're going to have medical supplies. We'll have a defibrillator. Next to it, we'll have a trauma kit, our kits in that area, maybe EpiPens, first aid supplies. And again, dream with me. Your dreams might be better than mine, but it's time to make sure that we have taken inventory of our tools and supplies, and that everybody without exception is aware of what we've got. And I think really the best way to do that, to crash through the psychological barrier, is have people actually touch them. Have people unzip and look in a first aid kit. I also don't want to make it so that people then are pilfering things and we don't have the supplies that we need, but that's going to be up to you to regularly keep up and make sure the inventory is correct. But I would much rather have people aware and have to deal with little issues of replacement than people who walk by a little further than they should because they think if they touch that cabinet, it might shock them. So I hope you understand my point, and you want to move in that emergency preparedness direction. Okay, as mentioned earlier, I wanted to return to civil disturbances. And I'm not going to maybe read through all of these bullets, but I do want to add something that can really dovetail from the first one, because it's not just that we would have a whole gathering of people suddenly on our property. There are also protests that would be considered protests as sit-ins and walkouts, like for the 16, 17 minutes for Parkland and the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas anniversary that we just passed on Valentine's Day on Sunday. But remember, many schools had those kind of walkouts after to commemorate the time, or maybe not just to commemorate, but to say, hey, we have this agenda, or we have this concern, or whatever it might be. And so what I really liked that happened in the aftermath, before some of those walkouts happened, is schools caught wind of them and said, would it not be maybe a better idea and more constructive if we invited everybody to take the time out of class, but not as a walkout? Let's all go into the auditorium, and we'll invite in a local state representative and a local state senator and let you ask them questions about what's coming through with school safety and all of the related security and emergency preparedness concerns that we might have. And I saw schools use that alternative planning very effectively. And in fact, sometimes they just kind of threw the idea out to students and let students then run with it after that. But regardless, I'm going to return to students in just a minute, but whatever we're doing, it will require collaboration with local authorities to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Sometimes we have parks and recreation groups. Sometimes we have, I don't know, a post office or a government building down the road. It's so important that we are in communication with them. Sometimes the village mayor is going to have access or words of advice. Let's use as much collaboration as possible, and then prepare the teachers and students in the community to be those who are reporting. If I'm out on the property and I see a group of people forming, gosh, that's information that inside the school they need to know right away. Every moment could be the moment that we needed to either do a reverse evacuation or mobilize transportation to move us to a safer area. And so with that see something, say something kind of mentality, we would certainly want to educate the teachers and students on what our options would be. Some might be that we're going to go into a lockout or a lockdown, or simply do the reverse evacuation, or like I said, move to an off-site area. People should know what the options are, so that when we say, here's what we're going to do, they're not going, what? Why are we doing this? I was never informed we even had plans like this. Let's stay far away from that kind of trouble. And then finally, notification procedures. And I want to say this about notification procedures. Most schools have Cadillac mass notification systems, and I'm proud of you for doing that. But I want to push you and challenge you to use them even more. If you've got a community college down the road and around the corner, shouldn't they also be on your mass notification system? Shouldn't they know if something's going on your property? And conversely, shouldn't you be on their mass notification system? I mention this with students all the time. Shouldn't we register students' cell phone numbers? Without a doubt, I would do that in high school, where kids are mobile and they're gone for vocational purposes or athletic events. If something's happening and they would ordinarily be on their way back to the school, shouldn't we have a method like our mass notification system to be able to communicate with them, to tell them what we want them to do and what the safest procedures would be to follow? So, you look at all of these stakeholder groups, and I want to encourage you to dream bigger dreams with mass notification than you're currently potentially implementing now. This is my favorite slide because it's all about student engagement, and I want to say there is appropriate ways to involve students, and we've learned even more through COVID about this. Now, in general, I'm probably not involving students in any kind of planning that are pre-K through 5th grade. I would involve them in drills, but in terms of planning and hearing their voice, and I'm waffling a little bit on fifth graders, but I would in general recommend that you keep it sixth grade and above. And what we know about those students is that they're ahead of us in technology. They probably have the more latest version of the iPhone or Droid than you do, and they've got a better pulse for what's really going on. And so let's figure out how to appropriately involve them in the safety and security dialogue, whether it's on a safety planning team or maybe getting some feedback on the systems and practices that we have in place, since they probably know all the loopholes already. I mean, the mission statements of our schools generally say we're preparing students for the next level of education, for vocation, for life, to be successful in life. And I think the best way to put our money where our mouth is to have them involved now. And a good place besides safety and security, and certainly intersects with it anyway, would be with technology and social media. Again, there's a world of knowledge there that we need to tap into, and I'm strongly challenging you to make sure that you're involving students in that kind of a way. In fact, I love it if a student would stand up sometime in a I don't know, an all-staff meeting to explain what TikTok is and why there's such a rage over it right now. And the same thing could be said about Snapchat or Instagram or whatever, but I do know this: they're ahead of us, and they've got information that will make us better if we'll take heed. And giving them the forum to teach us, I think, is priceless. And then finally, social awareness. I want to say this about social awareness. It's so interesting because many of the protests that we saw this past summer, many of them involved students, but some of them were even led by students. And listen, well, it doesn't matter to me which side of the political aisle you come down on. Students can access information more quickly and more efficiently than adults can. It's a generalization. I know there's some exceptions, but I stand by it. And that social awareness that now brings information to me that I may not even be aware of. My kids are 22, 24, 26, 29. And I know they've helped me, no matter which side of the aisle you think I'm on, moderate, because I was steeped in positions, and my kids brought me information that was persuasive, and not just persuasive, because sometimes we can say then let's label that as fake news or whatever. But I want to say the social awareness capabilities and levels that students have, that's the better word, levels, can really do us a service. That voice should be something that's being spoken into leadership. I want to share some really good resources and information with you. And the first one is cdc.gov. Most of you know that, and most of you have already seen that the latest guidance for schools was released last Friday. Listen, it may change in the upcoming weeks, months, as new strains come with the new administration. So that's always a good place to get information. PASS K-12 is the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, and I made mention of them earlier because I sit on the advisory board, and here is a group that kind of put agendas aside and took architects and school security directors and manufacturers of equipment and security consultants like me, and they said, let's all kind of put our agendas aside and come up with guidelines that every school should follow. And then let's put together checklists so they can bring these guidelines right down to their own facilities and get an idea of where they stand and where they want to be. And PASS has done that. And I think they're on version 5 now, but I want to encourage you to go look at that website. They're not-for-profit. And you're not going to find anybody who's trying to peddle their wares. It's just not like that. I'm a big fan, big enough to have joined the advisory board because I believe in what they're doing. NASP Online is the National Association of School Psychologists. And gosh, I've not been able to talk a whole lot about social emotional things because it's not my forte, but I do want to tell you this. The restrictions and isolation and all of the things that we've had to face for this year of time are going to have long-term effects. And for the sake of students and for the sake of adults, please look at the resources that you'll find at that link. SafeSchools.com is the website for our host, Vector Solutions, and I've been involved with helping them put together what I consider to be important courses for a long time, and so there's their website. Schoolsafety.gov came into existence a little bit more than a year ago, and it is the federal repository for school security and emergency planning resources. And that's sort of a mouthful, but I want to encourage you to go there. Schoolsafety.gov it's funded federally. It's terrific. And that's about all I can say about it. JusticeGrants.usdoj.gov is going to be the place that you'll find the federal grants like the COPS grant, the Stop School Violence grant, and grants that are currently moving through House like HR number 2, currently moving through Senate, and relief packages and all of these things coming to schools. Justice Grants is really that new website where you're going to find information about that. DHS.gov at See Something, Say Something is the place where you can get both hard copy like posters and electronic like pieces you can put in digital signage or even through social media about See Something, Say Something. That's the Department of Homeland Security. I strongly recommend they're school related and that you take a look at that and take advantage of it. And then finally, securityindustry.org is the Security Industry Association, and they've got this link, which is all about priorities for schools and keeping them safe. And so I like that association. They're trying to help schools, and this is the link that will take you where you need to go to get that done. And having kind of just run through those at the speed of light, I want to turn things back over to Laura now. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you sharing both your insights as well as all of those resources. And just to remind everybody, I know that was a lot that he shared, and we are going to send out a copy of the presentation afterwards so that you'll have access to all of those links and resources. And then we'll also share contact info again at the end as well for to get a hold of Paul if you have additional questions. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes to just share with you a little bit about how Vector Solutions can help address some of these areas that he's talked about today. At Vector Solutions, we're committed to helping create safer and more inclusive schools for both staff and students. And you can see there, many of you are probably or maybe familiar with probably what's our primary product in the market, Safe Schools Training, which is mostly known for staff training. But there you can see a snapshot of all of the safety and professional growth solutions that we offer to the market. Today I'm going to share just a little bit more about our staff training, our new student training, and also our new tip reporting and safety communications platform. Next slide. If you can, thanks. We've been providing online staff training, mostly in the safety and compliance areas, for about 15 years. We work with about 5,000 school districts around the country. All of our content is written by expert authors like Paul, and it's all designed specifically for schools. So we have over 300 courses that cover all of these topics that are listed there. I highlighted a few that kind of align with some of the topics that Paul was talking about today, and a couple that he worked with us directly on in the security area. Next slide. In 2019, we also introduced student safety and wellness training covering these topics. It's for grades 6 to 8, and then also grades 9 to 12. So they're broken out into age-appropriate course modules. They're video-based, they're really short, and they can be used in lots of different ways, both in person and also in remote learning environments. And they are really designed to help facilitate a lot of those important discussions with students. You know, Paul talked a lot about trying to engage students more in some of these areas, and one of the ways to do that is to, present them with information and then help, foster that dialogue with the students. So that's really what our student courses are designed to help districts address. Next slide. And last, I wanted to share with you that we recently launched a new program called Vector Solutions Live Safe. It's an advanced tip reporting and safety communications platform, which we're now offering to K-12 schools. And really the whole purpose of Live Safe is to help address a lot of what Paul was talking about as far as engaging your community and your safety and security processes, both for your staff and students, giving them a voice, giving them a way to share information that they've identified where there may be risks, or, information that they see of suspicious activity or things like that. The platform provides those opportunities. It also has additional features such as broadcast and check-in messaging, so talking a little bit about the notifications and things like that, giving you as an administrator a way to communicate out to your school community as well. So that's really, quick highlights about what Vector Solutions has to offer. I'll share contact info at the end if you're interested in learning more about any of those. But I did want to give an opportunity if anybody had any questions, we could go ahead and address those to Paul. If you had any, you can type them in the questions pane. I don't see any. I had a question, maybe, Paul, that you could address.
Yeah.
So for a lot of the planning that you talked about, the emergency planning and things like that, who would you recommend would be the key stakeholders that the district should involve in developing those plans?
Yeah, thank you. If it's emergency planning, and I'll tackle that one first and then safety planning after, but emergency planning, the non-negotiable, of course, is your emergency responders. And occasionally, Laura, I find a district says, yeah, well, the superintendent doesn't get along with the chief, and I just say this, that is, we can never be okay with that situation. Someone has to bring in somebody as a facilitator to get things done if that's the case, because there's just way too much at stake for people to have big personalities that can't fit in the same room. So those emergency responders are the non-negotiable. And after that, we certainly want to have somebody who would have knowledge of those with disabilities. That's an often forgotten part that ought not to be. We want to have administrators who are going to be overseeing this. We want to have people that are on an emergency planning team for whatever the reason might be. And then we want to have some community stakeholders, as I mentioned before, maybe somebody from the mayor's office or something like that, if there's something happening in town or on our property, everybody's talking with everybody. So those would be some of the key people. When we move to the safety planning side of things, students, I believe, are a non-negotiable, and so are parents. I may even have a parent on the emergency planning team, but it's a non-negotiable when we get to the safety planning team. And occasionally, Laura, someone will say, should we really have students? Because then they'll know, about where our different security measures are and things like that. And so what I usually say is this. First of all, I think they already know, and we're not fooling anybody. But if we were that concerned about it, or we thought our information was that sensitive, then just include the students up to a certain point of the meeting and then dismiss them early, almost like we do with our board meetings when we go to closed session. So, but certainly students and parents tend to be the most excluded from safety planning, and they should never be excluded as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. And we've got a couple of other questions that came in. Somebody asked regarding the tabletop exercises that you referenced. How do those really work? Or kind of if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. And thank you for asking me to provide a little more definition. But basically, we would put some key stakeholders around the table, and I'm just going to make it up, but let's say we would have a principal, somebody from facilities, maybe an administrative assistant, maybe even an emergency responder. We'd get some key stakeholders around the table, and then somebody would draw maybe out of a hat a scenario, and that scenario could be a weather-related incident or a violence-related incident, or even medical for that matter. That's why going to these places where you can find tabletop exercises will be tremendously enlightening for you. And then what we do is someone who's facilitating this, and I do this all the time, would read the scenario and then ask a question like, here's the scenario now, tell me, what are the first 3 things that you're going to do? And give them a finite amount of time, maybe 90 seconds, 2 minutes, to quickly powwow to come up with how they would respond in these initial stages. And then when time of that 90 seconds or 2 minutes, you can set it for whatever you want, but I like brevity because that simulates life. I call time and I say, stop, what are your answers? And then they give the answers, and I kind of flesh through a little bit how we could have tweaked, improved, or what I really liked about it. And then I say, okay, here's an update. Boom, now this has just happened. You now have 2 minutes to answer what you would do next. And you move that through. I like a tabletop exercise, Laura, that would never go more than 60 minutes. Now, good people disagree, and if you've got full responders, you might take a full morning to do something like that, but we generally start to lose people. I can do a tabletop in 30 minutes, or like I said, an hour would probably be more feasible, but that's what a tabletop would be. And at the end, we kind of just review everything and make changes to our plans and procedures based on what we learned.
Great, thank you. I think that was definitely helpful to give a little bit more context there.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody asked, I'm not paraphrasing exact words. Access control is a pain in my side. Is there more information and reading that I may use to implement changes?
Yeah, very good. And I'm glad you went within your side. First of all, the 2 areas that protect people the most, please hear me, are communications and access control. We can never have anything less than excellent communication systems, practices, etc., and access control practices. And those 2 areas are very difficult because we find less than comprehensive communications. We find gaps. We find we had this, but we couldn't access it when we needed to. And same with access control. How are people getting to places that they got to? And where are the places they're getting to? If it's not my roof, it's my boiler room or the door that somebody propped open was supposed to be on my team. So I get all of that. And it is what I present on a lot. So for whoever asked the question, I want to invite you to contact me, paul.timm@feapc.com, because I can't give you an easy, here's how you're going to reach the Holy Grail. But if you want to talk with me offline, I'll give you some ideas of places that you should begin with. But please never compromise with access control.
Thank you. Somebody was asking about suggestion for a good resource for looking at the touchless ID check-in systems that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah. Okay, there's any number of companies, and so I would just begin with a search engine, lest I, start mentioning companies like Raptor, and I don't want to go down that road, but that's what I would do. I would first just go to a search engine, and I would then start comparing. The other thing I would do is I would look at what other schools have in place. I would do a field trip. I would make a phone call. I would have somebody Zoom and show me what it's like right at their front desk. We can do all of this now. We don't have to be the beta test site for something that somebody suddenly came up with that should probably work and then find out that it doesn't when it counts the most. There are tried and true visitor management software solutions, and not just those, but as we've now had some Johnny-come-latelys and Chuck in a truck and all of that from I used to laugh about this, Laura. I would go in and somebody would say, if you would just step in front of that scanner, it's going to read your temperature. And then and I would say, really? Let's try it. And I everywhere I went, never once was I even normal in temperature. So I asked the security director at one of the places, have you ever seen it read normal or above? He said, only when I pass my cup of coffee in front of it, which again, I don't want to be the beta test site for something that may or may not work. I want to find out what's working, and that's probably the way to go.
Thank you. Let's see. This is a pretty specific question. What is the best practice for ending a lockdown? Announcing the end of the lockdown over the intercom or door-to-door release by school staff, local law enforcement? Any comments you might have on that?
Yes, I do. The magic formula is collaboration plus consensus. Please bring that question right into your safety planning or emergency planning team meeting. I will tell you this, a real lockdown is not going to end with a public address announcement. That's why many have shied away from doing that. But for the sake of operations, the public address announcement, which is sort of a mass notification, is by far the most quick and efficient way to do it. So that's why I say bring that question right into your planning meeting and use collaboration and consensus to come to what would be right. And by the way, once we do come to collaboration and once we do come to consensus using collaboration, Laura, our emergency plan is a living document. It doesn't mean that 6 months from now we're going to maybe change based on new information, new technology, or whatever it might be. So I hope that sort of non-committal answer is good enough.
Yep, thank you. Looks like we have maybe one more question. What is your opinion on, and this isn't, an opinion question, so I guess I'll let you decide how you want to answer this. What is your opinion on ALICE, active shooter emergency and notification training?
Right. ALICE stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, Evacuate. They were recently acquired. And again, I don't want to start saying names of companies because then, anyway, it's good. Look at ALICE is lockdown plus options. So is Run, Hide, Fight, which the Department of Homeland Security endorsed or put out. But ALICE does represent a financial commitment, and so it has all kinds of tools and resources that you won't get by just following the DHS Run, Hide, Fight. So I'm in favor of all of these. No one has found the perfect mousetrap. The closest we have might be ALICE right now. There are others who would disagree and say theirs is better. But sure, I'm a fan of all of these. They're all getting better as time passes.
Thank you. I think that was all the questions that we had. I also wanted to share, we did have a lot of nice comments posted. Just thanking you for all the information today. A lot of people said that it was very informative and they appreciated it. I did just want to reiterate one more time that the session was recorded, and we will be sending out probably in the next couple of days an email with a link to the recording and a copy of the presentation. And I just want to thank everyone again for spending some time with us today, and just wish all of you continued health and safety as you go forward and continue to hopefully emerge from COVID-19. So thank you all, and thank you, Paul, for your time today.
Thank you. Make it a safe day. Thank you.